Well, hello. Welcome to this episode of the About Time podcast with me, Chris Nichols. This is part of my Project 65 series where I'm getting to hang out and do some recordings with people who've influenced and inspired my work and been brilliant colleagues along the way. And I am delighted, really delighted that today our guest is Helen Sieroda. And Helen, welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I feel very kind of honored to be included in one of your inspired colleague people. So,
Well,
yeah.
you're welcome, and you are. and uh, and as we were saying just before we started the recording, it's brilliant to actually get to see each other here in any form because we keep trying to meet, and we haven't quite managed it, even though we don't live that far apart. You're just up the
Yes,
hill on the
yes. Well, there's
moor.
something
Yes,
just up the hill. Yeah, there's something in the diary, so we will have that coffee. So
we
that's
will.
going to happen.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
But Helen, I mean, I think it might be really good just to start by saying something about the work that you do because I've got these memories of where we first met, which is like Schumacher Car Park, and I think the connection there was um, we both were involved in a master's degree, which took students to Schumacher, and that's caused us both to have a longer Schumacher connection. And then, second memory, you invited me to the Mary Ward Centre to take part in a psychosynthesis deep ecology conference. But there's so much more to what you do than those two little incidents. So, can I just invite you to say something about who you are and what you do?
Okay. Well, I work as a executive coach, leadership coach actually is a better word, and I run a school of coaching, Wise Goose School of Coaching. And so that's the latest iteration. And into that feeds all of the things that I've done before. So I have a background in psychosynthesis, which is another interest that we share. And I trained in psychosynthesis way back in the 80s. Um, an interest, you mentioned the masters. So I did the masters in responsibility and business practice at University of Bath. You picked it up when it went to Ashridge. So that's another connection that we have. Um, and then I've had a long standing interest in Taoism since my 20s. I was a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese Zen Buddhist, for quite a long time, and active for a while in that community. In fact, I was a lay ordained member, which means I wasn't a monk. I didn't shave my hair, but I took bodhisattva vows. Goodness, I mean, what else? I think the place that I live on Dartmoor, that really influences me. And then I trained with Joanna Macy back in the 80s and worked with Joanna for
So
a
there's
while.
there's so many threads that we could pull on. I mean, we have to start somewhere. So, do you know, can we start with psychosynthesis? Because um, I think whilst lots of things you've just said might be familiar to people, I suspect that psychosynthesis is probably the most mysterious of those in the sense of, oh, what's that then? What is that then?
Uh, that is a question that psychosynthesis people have struggled to answer. Basically, psychosynthesis is a psychology, usually psychotherapy that came out of Italy from an Italian psychoanalyst who was a student of Freud, contemporary of Jung, Roberto Assagioli. And it's what you could put it under the heading of transpersonal psychology. And really all that means is that whereas Freud was interested in the basement really of the unconscious. Jung and Assagioli in different ways were interested in not just pathology, but in potential, in what we may be, to quote a title of a psychosynthesis book by Piero Ferrucci. So it doesn't ignore pain and suffering and crisis, but it includes also um, really the greatness and the wonderfulness of being human. And in fact, that was why both Jung and Assagioli broke away from Freud in the early days. So is
And you
that
know,
enough of a...
I love that description. I mean, I got into it myself, and this is before our paths crossed. I got into it entirely by chance by going to an open day, one of the psychosynthesis open days in North London. It's the Hendon, I think, where the
Huh?
institute was based,
Yeah.
and may still be based for all I know. And I was just very taken by how positive it was, and the psychology of human potential, and it had a place for spirituality without kind of insisting that any particular one form of spirituality was the form. But it didn't pathologize a spiritual belief, didn't see it as um, a diversion or something.
Well, or a regressive longing for the womb, which might be one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And more recently, I think positive psychology has emerged, and there's a lot in common with positive psychology and a psychosynthesis approach. I think maybe a lot borrowed, begged, borrowed, or stolen from that work. And then appreciative inquiry, which feeds into my work in coaching a lot. So it really works in coaching.
Yeah. So how did you even start with it? I mean, how did you wander into psychosynthesis?
Well, it was a bit like you, a bit by chance. I was working in the motor trade. So I was the manager of a car safety glass wholesaler, probably one of the biggest in the country at the time. And I loved the work. It was good work, but in my mid-20s, I kind of had a midlife crisis. And I was looking at the world. This was before we knew about climate change, but we had acid rain and we had some big oil spills. It was still the Cold War, so there was the threat of nuclear winter. So there was plenty to be thinking about. And I remember thinking very clearly, I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that was how I framed it I guess I was mid mid 20s, probably 25. And so I went on this sort of rampage of looking for ways of being part of the solution. And because I'd come out of doing quite a lot of martial arts, I began by looking at body work, shiatsu, massage, la 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 la, all of that. And then stumbled upon psychosynthesis through a friend who handed me a leaflet and said, I don't know these people, but this looks interesting. Went along to an open evening and I was, I just thought, this is it, signed up.
And these people, was that Diana?
This was with the Psychosynthesis Trust, which was different from the Hendon people you found. So this was with Diana Whitmore, who I still work with today. She comes along and
Brilliant. Isn't
teaches
that wonderful?
with Wise
Yeah.
Goose. And I went on to set up a training academy, or co-set up a training academy in Sweden. I was on the board of the Psychosynthesis Trust for, God, too long, more than 10 years. You followed me on the board
I
there.
did have a spell on the board, yes.
So I've done my time, and I'm not active with psychosynthesis these days. I go to summer schools in Italy every now and then and read in the library.
But is it, I get the sense though that it's still, you're not active as a therapist, you're not training therapists anymore, but it's woven into your life, it's woven into your coaching.
Yeah, well,
Is
it
that
couldn't.
right?
It
Yeah.
Yes, it couldn't not be really, because it was part of my life for so long. I don't sell the training, the Wise Goose training, I'm adamant that it is not a psychosynthesis training because there are other things in it. But of course, it permeates, and a lot of the models translate beautifully into coaching and into leadership. So yes, it's in there. It's one of the strands.
Yeah. And I think it's worth spending a bit of time thinking about your coaching because I know you to be an astonishing coach. I mean, absolutely brilliant coach, as well as training coaches. You know, all the coaching clients we have referred to you just are delighted by working with you. I mean, how would you describe your approach to coaching?
Oh my goodness. I don't think, well, how would I describe it? I
Sorry to
think,
do that to you.
so how would I describe it? I think because I have so many different strands to my work, um, and my background and my philosophy, that I can adapt quite well to where the client is. So I think that's one thing that 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 I bring. So if a client comes to me for coaching, they don't have to fit into my model. I can kind of flex and play with my model and just sort of play with what emerges. I think I can work because of all my years as a psychotherapist. I'm no longer a psychotherapist. I'm no longer registered, but I can work at depth. Um, but I'm clear about where the boundaries are. You know, so if somebody does need psychotherapy, I will know how to, I'll know how to make a diagnosis and refer them on. It's just, you know, rarely happens. So I can work at depth. I also bring quite a bit of humor to the work. So I can be very serious, but I think mostly I bring quite a light touch because, you know, I've been doing it so long. I don't take coaching or myself too seriously anymore. And I think sometimes people choose not to work with me because they want somebody a bit more earnest. And I can be earnest, but mostly I just want us to enjoy the process.
Yeah. And enjoying the process isn't the same as doing trivial work or
Oh no.
trying to entertain people, is it? I mean,
Oh no.
you can you can love
Not
love the
at all.
work, you can do really deep human work and have fun doing it. I mean, that's
Yeah. Well, and you know, to go back to psychosynthesis, I think one of the things that Assagioli brought to the world of psychology was the belief that joy is important and that joy is actually a spiritual or a transpersonal quality and that we need to cultivate that. And that kind of fits also with my time with Vietnamese Zen Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh, because he also brought great depth and awareness of the suffering in the world, but with such a light and joyful touch. To be in his presence was a joy, literally. So I think that's yes, that's a big part of the work. If I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't do it. And if I thought the people who were working with me couldn't enjoy it, I wouldn't. I would say, come on, you're maybe not with the right person.
yeah. So that's brilliant. So can we not lose the psychosynthesis because it's woven through things? And I do indeed want to ask something about subpersonalities at some point.
Okay.
But I just want to weave in the master's degree and Schumacher and things like that. I mean, uh, how, how did you come into that?
Oh, well, that was the master's degree was my 50th birthday present to myself. So, and it has had as deep and as broad an impact as the psychosynthesis had. So and again, it was just, you know, I was sort of doing a random search. It just came up randomly on my computer and they happened to have an open day in Bath. And I thought, oh, Bath, nice to have a day out in Bath. That's a nice place. So I took myself on the train to Bath, went to the open day where I met Judy Marshall and Peter Reason. I still see Peter every month. We have a little writing group, three of us. So I still see Peter. And I just thought it felt like coming home. And it felt like such a good fit with the work I'd done before. And I put my application in that night and found the money, actually borrowed the money to do it. It was just so, for the time of my life and the way that my work went, it really influenced the work that I do with Wise Goose. Wonderful,
Now
wonderful course.
we should
Tragic
say for
that it's
people
ended.
that Oh, I know. We'll come to that as well. Um, you know, we should say for people that this was like an astonishing master's degree, way ahead of its time. I mean, its time is now, and of course, its time was then as well. But it came out of Anita Roddick seeking out um, the with the new Academy of Business, the trying to create an MBA fit for um, a finite planet, and seeking out Jill Coleman, I think, at UE, who then I don't know the mechanism, but ended up starting the masters at Bath, and it was such a brilliant thing. And it's an action research based masters, and has a central place for deep ecology, and took students to Schumacher and all of that. Um, I mean, yeah, I mean, what you say, it's still part of your life, at least an equal part. I mean, in what way?
Yeah. Well, I fell in love with action inquiry and action research. And the idea of living life as inquiry, that Judy Marshall
Beauty,
wrote
yeah.
the book. And it was just the breadth. It just fitted. It kind of fitted with a lot of work I'd already been doing. I mentioned Joanna Macy, and she was a part of the course back then. I trained with Joanna back in '87.
Oh, so that was even
Oh,
before. That was before
oh
the.
yes,
Oh, right, okay.
yes,
I
yes,
didn't know that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. When I graduated from psychosynthesis, the first thing I did was train with Joanna, and then I worked with Joanna alongside Joanna for a few years. So it just brought things together with a new kind of foundation for doing the work, which was the action research bit. And it's embedded in the Wise Goose training, perhaps more so than psychosynthesis. It lends itself so well to training, to personal development, professional development, coaching, leadership development. It just, the leadership development framework, the LDF that you're trained in, I think fits really well with it. So yeah,
Yes, and um, and action inquiry, action research is woven into everything I do. Similarly, I didn't do the master's degree. I did a different master's degree, the Ashridge Masters in Consulting, which was also massively influenced by Peter Reason, because um, the faculty on that masters had either come from the Ralph Stacey Complexity School or the Bath Carp doctoral program, and it was a weaving together of complexity and action research, action inquiry that I was trained in. So, and I guess that's been part of my work in the second half of my Ashridge career, but also in setting up Game Shift, where you know you were kind enough to join in right from the earliest days.
yeah. And again with Game Shift, again that just was such a beautiful fit. So, it's been a joy and an honor to be part of Game Shift and see it grow and change and morph. And I look forward to seeing what happens next.
Yes, and Game Shift has always been um, it is itself a cycle of inquiry.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah,
it's not a traditional company. It's never had a business plan. Um, um, Possibly because I'm not capable of writing one, but Philippa is. But it has deliberately not had one. Um, and people have always been, we've been just as happy to have people have Game Shift as their spiritual home as their place of work. So some people, hardly have done any work, and some people do loads, and that's all
yeah,
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And of course
yeah.
we had the beautiful Carol Bond with us, didn't we? And she was
Oh,
another colleague and friend
yeah,
from
yeah. She
a
she
similar path.
was yeah, she was another colleague and friend, um, and she did the Wise Goose training. She was a great coach,
Of course.
and
Yeah.
I loved Carol. It was such a loss. She died too soon. But but yeah. Yeah, the lovely
Yeah,
Carol Bond we
she's
have in
she's
common.
she's very much here,
Yeah.
as is Chris Seeley, of course, who's also
Yeah,
woven
yeah,
into all of this.
I met Chris Seeley. Yeah, I met Chris Seeley through the masters. She did the same masters that I did. Yeah. It's funny, just coming back to what you said about not having a business plan. We share that. Wise Goose has never had a business plan, and on purpose, because I, I see it as a plan kind of gets you too fixed. And I think, following action research, there's just cycles of action and inquiry. And, you have an experiment, you try something, and then you kind of come back and you say, well, how did that go? And you say, well, it was brilliant, but it was, well, maybe this wasn't so good. You tweak it, you move it on. And so the business plan for Wise Goose has evolved. And that includes becoming a B Corp.
Yeah,
It's just like, oh, this looks interesting. What would it be like to play over here? But it was never part of a business plan.
I know, and that's hard work, being a B Corp, and I think you've been through a reaccreditation, haven't you? Which is, you know,
Uh-huh.
even more so. It's massive amounts of
Yep.
work.
I am in the midst of the verification of the 3-year recertification. And actually I have the latest message from the verifier that I am struggling to respond to, because basically she doesn't, the business is more complex than they can deal with. And she is wanting to kind of take me back to the impact, or they call it the impact business model from 3 years ago, because the current one is she just can't get her head around it. So I'm thinking, do I just say yes? And she says, if you do this, we'll fast track you. But actually, do I then not get credit for all of the amazing things that I've done in the last 3 years? By integrating sustainability into the training more, by integrating regenerative leadership and regenerative coaching into the training, by having zero waste to landfill, getting to carbon neutrality. Do I, for the sake of being fast tracked, do I kind of let go of that? Do the points matter? Yes, they do. Do the points matter? No, they don't. So I'm doing battle. I'm doing battle with the system. I don't know if I will remain B Corp 3 years' time. When it's time to reaccredit, I might just say, it's not worth it. But at the moment, it's worth it, but it's a lot of work.
But
So that
I
was a bit
think
of a
that's a
rant.
but that's a really good um, example of the relationship between purpose as a live inquiry and purpose as a, I don't know, as a coaster or mouse mat or
Yeah,
something. Because
yeah.
what I'm hearing there is not, you don't have a business plan, but my word, you have a purpose, and that's the same as Game Shift. We you know we are very clear that we are for something, and also in terms of action research, we're valuable for me, valuable for us, valuable for them. Unless we're about flourishing at all those levels, we might as well pack up. And I'm hearing that in what you're saying.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if something isn't bringing life into the mix, then it's, and by that I don't mean that there aren't, I mean, you have to do your accounts, you have to do grindy stuff when you run a business. But if something isn't life enhancing in the purpose of, if it isn't serving that purpose, then it's not worth it, really. And at the moment, as I am mid recertification with the B Corp machine, I'm kind of thinking, oh my goodness, is it bringing enough life to it? I mean, it's a great community, and I think it's important to take a stand for doing better business. I think it's important to put your kind of flag in the sand and say, this is what we stand for, and we are going to be held accountable, because there is
Yes, yeah.
so much purpose watch. And people say, oh, we're lovely and we're doing good things and we're purposeful. And actually, there's no accountability. There are no checks and balances or measures. And B Corp gives that. It does hold me to account.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
you
good.
talk about purpose wash, and you didn't say greenwash, but there's lots of that. But I was talking the other day online with Giles Hutchins.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and Giles was saying he's actually stopped calling his work regenerative because he's worried about the kind of the regenerative washing that's going
Yeah.
on. And
Yeah.
he's gone back to
Yeah.
one of his earlier book titles, which is Future Fitness. He said, just,
Yeah.
future fit
Yeah.
for life on on this planet. And his new book, which is a big compendium of a encyclopedia of what I thought was going to be called regenerative work, he calls Keys to Future Fit Leadership,
Yeah.
because he said, I just
Yeah.
can't call it regenerative anymore because there's so much dilution of
Yeah.
the word.
Yeah. Everything is regenerative now. But I think regenerative is better than sustainability because sustainability implies just kind of being less bad and
Yes,
keeping things more or less the
sustain
same.
what? Yes.
Whereas regenerative does bring that sense of life into the mix. Do you know his future fitness that'll get grabbed and used and diluted? I think we have to not get too hung up on the words and think more about what it is are we doing and who are we being,
Yes.
and
Well,
letting that stand.
I'm waiting for one of the major consultancies to claim an awakening process, bodhisattva path or something. It's going to
Oh,
happen.
yeah, it's just begging to mindfulness. I mean, just look at the way mindfulness has been co-opted. That over the last few decades. So, I think, if Giles feels that strongly, fair enough. But honestly, I think he's backing a losing horse because his future fitness will be there in, give it 5 years,
Yes,
three
and
years.
I think for him, as I know for you, the thing that matters is not so much the name as the work. And I think it's worth saying.
Yeah.
So how do you yourself, like in Wise Goose, for example, make sure that the work stays real and valuable in terms that matter to you? I mean, what do you actually do as a practice to do that?
Well, I think for my own personal practice, the main thing that I do is spend quite a lot of time uh, here on the moors, here in Dartmoor, or actually it was in Clissold Park last week in the middle of London, just being, just kind of being, frankly. I don't even want to say being in nature, although that's a big part of it, but noticing. So I think paying attention and noticing maybe the small, insignificant things that we might not normally notice. So paying attention. I think Kathleen Jamie, the poet and writer, said that, what we pay attention to is it is, I apologize to Kathleen for misquoting her, but it's a political act. Paying attention is a political act. It
Yes,
you
it's
it can
certainly a
change
radical. It
worlds.
certainly is a radical act. Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
Definitely. So that's the practice. And of course that draws on the kind of years of working with Thich Nhat Hanh. But I wouldn't call it mindfulness. I wouldn't call it. It's a kind of hybrid that includes mindfulness. It includes action inquiry. It includes just being lazy. Just being lazy, sitting with a cup of coffee and noticing what the
But
rooks are doing
I'm
today.
noticing, you know, um, you're describing it in a very human way and just being lazy. But if I put that in terms of what's appearing now in the literature, we've got Megan and John and their research on spaciousness as a radical act, and of course, there's an element of it which is you are, and I know this from time in your garden and your allotment in near home. That time is really important to you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's I won't be going in the garden thinking about work and thinking about what I'm doing and thinking about whatever I should be thinking about, but I am spending time just widening perspectives and and letting go of fixed ways of thinking about things and just playing with what arises. And, permaculture kind of fits into the design of, I've not done a permaculture training, but permaculture fits into the design of the training. And you listen for the feedback. You look at how things want to move in the garden. You look at, one practice to go back to what you've saying about with my work, with the training, is I'm continually listening for feedback from the students. And because of the B Corp, gathering that in a much more structured way than I did before. And that's been really useful. So you listen for feedback, you look at what's happening in the world. You don't get too fixed because things change. This last year, since January, the whole geopolitical world is kind of shaken up and changing, and we don't know where that's going to go. That impacts on your work as a coach, and that impacts on the wider systems that our clients are in and how successful, whatever that means, they will be in their work. And it impacts on what I bring into the training. So that just keeps it fresh. If I was just churning out the same old program, the same old course, again and again, without bringing in the wider context, I'd get so bored with myself.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's another thing I think that our work has in common. And for my part, the way I articulate it goes back to working with Chris Seeley, who's been hugely influential on me in terms of how I formulate this, who she just said, well, all the artful work I do, as in Chris, she said, it's just being alive, and people love work that's alive because so much of the organizational world isn't. And when people encounter something alive, they go, oh wow, it can be like that. And it's
Yeah.
a really radical thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it kind of, again, that's another thread that runs through the work that I do. So, yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're about 30 odd minutes in now, and I do want to make sure I've got two things I really want to do. I want to ask you a little bit about subpersonalities because I think I've got a little bee in my bonnet. Uh, there's another thing I want to do, which is just to give you space to say something about what. So what next? What's your edge now? While that process is somewhere in the back of your mind, I mean, can I just ask about subpersonalities because you talked earlier about the relationship between um, everything you've done so far and vertical development and the leadership development framework or the global leadership profile and all of those things. Bill Torbert's work and uh, Rook's and Elaine Herdman Barker's work and all of that. Uh, and we'll put a link in the notes on this so that if anybody hasn't heard of it, they can find out what it is. But essentially, in brief, I see it as
You've just broken up on me.
well, let's. It says it's still working at my end, so I hope we're still recording. So, you know, the
Okay.
the world views. It's the action logics are like ways of seeing the world and formulating your action in response to that. And gradually over a lifetime, you might gain more and more comprehensive views, ways of viewing a system. And the later formulations of this aren't hierarchical either. They're presented more as adult development of almost like colours on a palette, where you might have glimpses and dips in and out and fallbacks and fall forwards to different worldviews. And it just struck me in that formulation, there looks like quite a strong connection to subpersonalities, where at one time my diplomat in worldviews might be called on, and that might be a cluster of characteristics like from a subpersonality, and the bigger, more integrated worldviews parallel the integration process in psychosynthesis. And I just wondered if you've thought about any of this, or if you haven't, whether it makes any sense to you.
Well, the first time I came across the leadership development framework, And the different, you mentioned diplomat and expert and achiever and all of that. Immediately I thought of subpersonalities. So I just made that connection right away. And that kind of breaks up a little bit the tendency to see it as hierarchical and, oh, I have to make progress from this to this, at the same time as acknowledging that there is a process of integration and human development that goes on.
Yes.
And I would rather talk about, I often work with people who are expert achievers on that framework.
Yes.
And the way that I hold it is seeing that that's part of their development. That's how they, often we'll say with managers or leaders, what got you here isn't going to get you there. So we become quite attached, or in psychosynthesis terms, quite identified with a particular way of working and being and doing what we have to do. And the problem isn't the expertise that you gain. The problem is how rigidly you hold that identification, because every identification in psychosynthesis terms, every identification eventually becomes a limitation, and every identification is ultimately limited. It's ultimately not the whole truth. So I think holding that sense of spaciousness and openness and valuing. So we don't want to get rid of an identification. What we want to do is sort of loosen its hold and kind of harvest or bring on or help it to develop. Because often a subpersonality forms around, well, in childhood around a trauma perhaps. But in work, it's often around, this is what I do to survive in this place. If you're working in a big corporate. And so it's kind of just loosening that up a little bit and playing with, well, what are the qualities of this that I want to keep? What are the qualities of being an expert that are good? Or what are the qualities of being a diplomat that are useful? What are the qualities of being an achiever that actually serve me well? And what limits me? And how do I open that up and play with it and integrate it and loosen? I'm doing this, loosen
Yeah.
the fixed identity. When I say an identification, I mean it's a kind of I think this is who I am, and
You
that
know,
limits me.
I mean,
This is all I am.
we both have this kind of hand gesture as we're talking about it. It's almost like a mandala-like quality of, yeah, something matters and there's something more than, and it's really important that there's a porousness, a porosity, and curiosity. Otherwise, you've got fossils, and it's the fossilization
Absolutely.
that would be a problem,
Yeah.
not the existence of
Yeah.
the thing, just a
Yeah.
fossilization of it, because then it wouldn't be
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah. And this is where the importance, I mentioned earlier on, this is where the importance of having a light touch as a coach, of bringing a bit of humor in so we can kind of laugh at ourselves, which helps, humor helps to loosen an identification. Again, that was something from Assagioli. And bring a sense of playfulness and fun, which brings in the action inquiry. Let's experiment with a different way of doing this. This is an action experiment. Let's just hold it lightly. Go out and see what happens if you show up in a meeting differently. And then let's come back and talk about it. Um,
Love that.
so
I
it,
love that.
it so yeah, so it kind of all holds together in my mind. I don't see it as separate
I love
things.
the dance there between the rigor and the depth and the humor. The there's a lightness that makes something possible.
Yeah. If we can't laugh at our foibles, and the places where we get hooked and fixed, if we can't just look at that with a smile, we are stuck, basically.
But
There needs to be some
then we're back
lightness.
to, yeah, so much of this is about space for reinventing the story, allowing different story, allowing a richer story, and the identification with one thing, one position, only thisness, um, doesn't allow that possibility. And this links to, I was on one of these earlier. I was talking with Jeff Mead about his new work on personal narratives and therapeutic storytelling. Michael's work in his life in coaching and Buddhism, and there's so many threads that run through all of that and our work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think
oh no, go on, Helen. Yes, please.
I was just going to say that I think it is profound work. So the fact that I'm talking about lightness and humor and spaciousness and fun and joy doesn't mean that it's frivolous. It's actually profound. It's profound because how else do we meet the tragedy that's happening in the world? It's not to turn away from that. I mean, that's what Joanna Macy, who I trained with, talked about, holding the gaze. So part of it is holding the gaze and allowing space for the despair that we can feel and that we all feel at times when faced with, whether it's a biodiversity loss or whether it's human suffering or, the oceans or the plastics or the fear for the future. That, I fear for the future of my son and his generation. So it's not to deny any of that. It's just to find effective ways of meeting that don't cripple us or make us kind of do suffering as a performance rather than as a kind of human response. It doesn't pathologize it. It's like, yeah, we should be feeling some despair. I set up this is on last weekend, I set off a new cohort of training in the Wise Goose training. And in the room, there were the usual mixture of people from not-for-profits, corporates, and a few people who were in the humanitarian sector and at high levels in the humanitarian sector and in sustainability. The level of despair in that opening day was bigger than I have seen in a long time. And yet at the end, the level of, maybe hopefulness isn't quite the right word, but the level of spaciousness as they left after 2 days was a joy to behold. But I think there's a lot to be sad about, really.
There's a lot. I mean, I remember Satish Kumar saying this. It's really, really easy to fall into despair given the situation we're in, and the solutions, the positive work doesn't come from the despair. It comes from the doing something despite the despair. There is something to work for. And Joanna and I can't remember, Chris Johnson called it active hope, don't they? Which is not complacent hope. It's doing some work that does something.
Yeah. And not to be in denial, but not to just the burden of what's happening globally and geopolitically is too big a burden for one person's shoulders to bear. But we can have an open heart, and I think it was Shantideva, the Buddhist, who said, a heart that is broken open can contain the whole universe. And Thich Nhat Hanh said something very similar. And it's not to walk around heartbroken and crying, but it's just to be open. And there is still so much beauty and so much goodness and so much potential and possibility in the world.
In one of our earlier interviews, I interviewed you to write a blog post back in COVID, and you talked about sitting in your allotment or your garden looking at a stag beetle and saying, how easy it would be not to notice and to step on the stag beetle, and how important in your work it was to notice and not step on the stag beetle. And there's something that it's right there, isn't it? I mean, it's not just noticing the beauty of the charismatic, glorious, the whole forest and the snow-capped mountains and the snow leopard. It's also the stag beetle.
It's right,
and the slime mold.
Right here, and I think it was an oil beetle.
Was it an oil beetle?
But there you go. There you
Uh,
go. You're paying attention to whether it's an oil beetle or a stag beetle. But yes, you don't have to go to far-flung places. You know, Robert McFarlane's just written a book that I'm reading a little bit of
oh,
about rivers. Is
I've just finished listening to it. Yes,
yeah,
is a river alive? Yes.
is a river alive? You know, he went to this place and that place, and he did who knows how many transatlantic flights to wherever. And actually, he could have just stayed with his chalk stream, and there are plenty of
Yes, it was
rivers within
beautiful.
walking.
A beautiful
Yeah,
start and finish at the chalk stream. Um,
yeah,
uh, yeah, and he did meet some. I mean, this is, of course, the structure of his books. They are brilliant stories about amazing, inspiring people.
yeah,
People.
yeah,
But I did my work. I was on Peter's latest round of the Living Waters inquiry, and I walked 100 meters down and sat by the weir on the Exe.
yeah, yeah,
Yes, um, and I think I got all I needed to get, but I possibly couldn't write a bestseller out of it because well, who knows? Yeah,
who knows?
who
Yes, yes,
knows? Now
probably not.
I want to know what's your what next? What next, Helen? What's the
Well,
edge?
it's funny that we're talking about Robert McFarlane and books, and you couldn't write a bestseller. And I think what next for me is actually to prioritize my writing practice more. And I have been struggling with that for years. I'm kind of the writer who doesn't write, and other things will take its place. But actually, I think as a way of living life as inquiry, to go back to Judy's lovely title of her book, and part of my own practice of noticing, helping me to notice and pay attention, I do think that my writing needs to be cherished, is the word that comes. Cherished, given space to, given time to. And I really struggle with that. You said, what's my edge? It is an edge because it's a bloody uncomfortable place to sit, and I'm continually falling off and failing, definitely failing to produce anything. And I know it's important, and I don't. So I wish I could say, oh, I have this great project and I'm going to develop this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to be over there and I'm going to be a big hero and everything's going to be lovely. And just you wait and see. It's actually very small practice that matters. And I think will probably feed into what I do if I do it. And
Yes.
yeah,
Whatever it is, I look forward to hearing more about what comes out in the cycles as
yeah.
you're exploring it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, plenty of oil beetles for sure, and rooks. The rooks feature quite heavily. They're very noisy neighbours in May. And I was inspired by Kathleen Jamie. Did you read her latest book, Ken? Everybody should read that book. Short pieces. She has a way of, she's a poet, but she writes prose as well, but so carefully observed with such humility and humanity. And when I read that book and when I saw her speak, I saw her at the book launch in London.
Okay.
I was so inspired. I haven't been so inspired. This was probably November or something. I haven't felt that inspired for quite a long time by
We will
somebody that
make
I'd met.
sure that we get the title and her name, and we'll put a link in the notes to this so that people
Yeah.
can follow it up. Yeah.
Well, the thing with reading Kathleen Jamie's Cairn was I read it and I thought, oh shit, that's the book I wanted to write. I may as well give up now because she is so brilliant and does it so beautifully.
I keep reading books like that, which is the books that stop me writing anything, and I have to get over
Exactly.
myself. I have to get over myself and
Exactly.
just write the book that only I can write. Yeah.
Well, I think that is the edge. So when you said, what's the learning edge? I think the edge is I got to get over myself. If there's an identification, if there's a subpersonality that's kind of got me, it's it's kind of buried in there around my writing practice.
Yeah.
So
Helen,
maybe by the time I'm 90, I might get through that, but maybe before.
maybe before. Brilliant. Give it a go. Why not?
Why not?
Helen, it's been brilliant. We're just about at 50 minutes. We should
Yeah,
we should
we should
stop,
wrap.
and but you never know. We're going to meet up for a coffee and lunch in Exeter, and who knows what may come out of that. But it's brilliant to have you on here. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for being the brilliant friend, colleague, and co-adventurer that you've been all these many years. So,
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to the rest of the journey. So let's keep exploring and playing together.
let's do that. Helen,
Yeah.
thank you very much. See you soon.
Okay.
And
Bye.
everybody, thank you for looking at this podcast. We'll be back very soon with more. But meanwhile, Helen, thank you, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.